Well, hey, good morning, and I am so glad to see you guys today, especially to see some old friends like Glenn. I don't know where Glenn Gibson went, but there he is over here. Yeah, Glenn and Wendy Gibson, to see Daniel Gluck, good friends from William Jessup. Actually, it's just Jessup now, I understand. So, yeah, so that's a cool thing. So you'll have to, when we have our sharing time, you'll have to tell us how that has developed a little bit, but nevertheless, we have a good group today, and so that's even better. And I'm going to do something different today than normally. I would tell you a story about a missionary that lived an exceptional life, a life that would challenge us. And I am going to tell you a story about a missionary who does that, but you might not think of him in the same way that we think of a Hudson Taylor, for instance. And so we'll get to that part in a minute. But we're going to do something else, a little fun today. So just a little bit of a warm-up now. I want to ask you a couple questions, and just to get a show of hands, probably more than anything else. And the first question would be, who here is a history buff? Anybody a history buff here? Okay, so Scotty and Glenn a little bit, okay. Well, history is a good thing, isn't it? Yes. Especially when we can learn from history, and history helps to define where we're living today. It helps give substance and helps connect the dots to where we're living today. We're going to do a little bit of that. But also, I want to ask you, anyone here watch the coronation of King Charles III this weekend? Okay, big hands, okay, because I'm going to call, okay, good. So Deb and Scotty, okay, I'm going to come back to you guys in a minute because that's going to be important. And people are talking about that right now, aren't they? And that'll be important as well. Okay, so the next one, this is a show of hands. Or actually, you can shout this out, okay? I'm going to show you something real quick, and you tell me what this is. Oh, Dave, you got it. Man, you guys nailed it. Okay. So you know your geography. This is going to be very important as well. In fact, I probably should have brought a piece of tape and just taped it up here, but I'll put it over here just for the time being. So that flag will become important as well. Now, the last question. This is more personal. Anybody here own a pair of Reebok shoes? Okay. Jeremy? Okay, good. Anybody else? Oh, do you, Mark? Okay, perfect. Okay, that's going to, you think, where on earth are we going? These are pretty random questions. But trust me, I'm going to tie them all together in the brief time that we have. Okay, so first of all, I asked you about the coronation this weekend and who watched it. And you know what? To me, it was very interesting, the symbolism that was involved. A ton of symbolism, from swords to, let's see, you watched it, Scotty? No, let's see. I thought somebody, Deb, you said you watched. Okay, do you recall that there was something that was round? An orb. Anybody know what the orb is all about?
The world?
It is, it's a world. But can you describe the orb even more?
There were three continents or three parts that the world.
So, excuse me, David, what you got? Huh?
The three known continents of the world at that time.
Okay, that when it was developed, right? And there's one other very, was it David?
Yeah. The top of the cross.
Boom! You got the top of the, and what did that symbolize? It symbolized that may Jesus Christ be the ruler over all the world. And I thought, here, that's what we're all about, isn't it? We want to see Jesus Christ reign eventually. He's reigning now. But one day every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that He is Lord, right? But we want to see that in actuality. We want to see that happen. And I thought that's very interesting. But there was another part of the coronation that I thought was really interesting. In the cathedral there, Westminster Abbey, if you saw any part of that service, there's a very conspicuous piece of furniture kind of standing by itself. Anybody recall what that was?
St. Edward's chair.
But you nailed it, David. That's right. King Edward's chair. And that chair, that throne, if you will, they call it the coronation throne. It's over 1,000 years old. It's really fragile. And in actuality, over the years, it's been vandalized. And there's choir boys carved their names in the back of it. Yeah, now I know David works with junior high kids. He knows all about this. Mark knows about, okay, after they carve their names, how do I clean this up now? So anyway, but this is very interesting. That throne, and here's a picture of it, but if you can see it, it was very conspicuous till the king sat in it, and then and that's what it was all about. But what's very interesting is the bottom part here, where this lattice work is. In that slot, if you will, there is a stone that is placed. It's called the Stone of Destiny, or another name is, you probably know it as well.
Stone of Scone.
The stone of Scone, or Jacob's pillow. And how this got, I don't know all the history around this, but supposedly this is the actual stone in Genesis 28 when Jacob has his dream and he sees angels ascending and descending Jacob's ladder, and he wakes up from this dream and he says, surely God must be in this place. And he calls the place, anybody know the name? Dave, man, you nailed it again. Bethel. And he does something. Do you remember what he did from that story? He takes this stone and he sets it up and makes it kind of a monument, if you will, a pillar. And how it got from Israel, or wherever it was, to Great Britain, I don't know. That's probably another part of a story. And whether it's authentic or not, I don't know that either. But it does make for a very interesting story in the sense that here's something that was actually predated that chair. That the kings actually would sit on that stone. And the idea was that, oh, surely you are sitting right in the place with God. And I thought, well, that's kind of a neat idea. Boy, wouldn't we love our president to say, hey, I'm trusting in the Lord completely, and that I want to follow him absolutely and totally. And when the coronation is over, like it will be right now, they're going to take that stone out of that throne, and they're going to take it back to Edinburgh Castle in Scotland. So you think, well, Dan, that's an interesting story. What's that got to do with anything? Well, let me tell you. Remember, I brought this flag. This is a very interesting flag. And flags in general, we have our U.S. flag. It has, stars and stripes. It has very highly symbolic parts to it. Likewise with this flag. In fact, this flag is actually, do you know how many flags are put together in this flag? Actually, three. Three countries. When Britain became part of what they call the United Kingdom, uniting three countries, actually it's more than that because Wales is there too, but Wales isn't represented in this one. But anyway, you have, you've got the white stripes this way, this cross, and the blue background. This is the Scottish flag. Okay, you have this X here, this way. This is King George's flag. And then you have these little tiny red stripes here. That's the Irish. I don't know, red in Ireland. I don't know how that happened, but it's Northern Ireland. So, anyway. So, but we're going to go back to Scotland today. And does anybody know who the patron saint of Scotland is? You told me you weren't a history. You know, if you were on Jeopardy, you would be nailing it now, my friend.
All the right answers the whole time.
And anyway, yeah, it's St. Andrew. Now, let's kind of go back, and we're going to tie this together here in a minute, but let's talk about, anybody know a factoid about St. Andrew? Anything at all? Now, David, I'm going to call on you because you have all the answers.
Was he from a royal family?
St. Andrews? Well, actually, St. Andrew, not plural, but he was from Bethsaida. It's by the ocean, obviously, because what was his profession?
Fisherman?
He was a fisherman. That's right. Okay. Okay. How about another question about St. Andrew?
First disciple.
Who said that over here? You're right. He was the first disciple. Who was his brother? Peter. Now, Andrew's a very interesting guy. Did you know that prior to him becoming the first disciple, John tells us that he was also a disciple of John's. The Gospel of John, the writer of John, tells us that Andrew was a disciple of John. Jesus walks by, they engage, and Jesus invites him to spend the day with him. He does. He goes back, and he basically comes to Peter, and he says, "We've found him. We've found the Messiah." And he takes Peter to Jesus. And that will characterize Andrew's life. That this is the key point. Andrew brought people to Jesus. Just like, what do we want to do? What we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about bringing people to Jesus. And so Andrew brought Peter, but he didn't stop there. John goes on a few chapters later, and this is now the feeding of the 5,000. And do you know how Andrew figures in that story? David? Was it you, David? Yeah, okay. The Davids here seem to be having a little bit of a yeah, a little bit of a, yeah, okay. He did. He brought that boy who had five loaves of barley and 2 fish to Jesus to see a miracle. But didn't stop there in his life. Andrew would go on, and later on, almost in the Passion Week now, he does something else. Anybody remember that last part? I want to read to you kind of an interesting thing that goes on with this. Anybody remember that? This is a little more vague. Well, some Greeks come to Andrew and they say, "We want to see Jesus. We want to see Jesus." So what does he do? He brings them to Jesus. Here's that characteristic of Andrew again, bringing people to Jesus. And Jesus then goes on and he says this in John chapter 12. He says, "Truly, truly, I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. Whoever loves his life will lose it, and whoever hates his life in this world will keep it for eternal life. He who serves me must follow me." And I think those words of Jesus probably rang in Andrew's ears. Because Christ would be crucified, and what would happen for the next 30 years? Andrew would travel extensively, and he would do what? He'd bring people to Jesus. He'd be a missionary. He would bring people to Jesus. And then in 60 AD, he's in Greece, thinking, well, isn't that interesting? He's in Greece. He is sharing the gospel with Gentiles. And he gets into trouble for it. And the Roman government decides they're going to crucify him. And he doesn't want to be crucified the way his Lord was crucified, like a cross. Instead, he says, no, that would be too good for me. I will lose my life for Christ. He's crucified like this, in the shape of an X. And that's where the X comes from in the Scottish cross. But the story even gets more interesting from this point on. We now fast forward a couple hundred years. It's the 5th century, actually it's the 6th century. And Andrew's bones are buried in Greece. And they decide they're going to exhume him. And somebody wants to take him to Constantinople, because that's where the seat of Christendom was supposed to be relocated. Before they could do that, there's a monk, supposedly. And I'll tell you where I got this information. But anyway, a monk supposedly takes these bones, and it says he gets a vision, and he says, go to the ends of the earth and protect my bones. So he goes to Britain or to Scotland. And the story there's 3 versions of the story now. One is that he gets to a place in Scotland called Fife. And that's where St. Andrew's Church is, the ruins of it today. What else is near Fife? Anybody know? Very famous place. No. Now that would be interesting if we could tie that one together. No, actually, it's the most famous golf course in the world. St. Andrews, that's right. Well, duh, that kind of follows, doesn't it? So another story says that there was a shipwreck, or basically a storm, the ship was wrecking, and the bones were miraculously taken from the ship and put in Fife. I don't know if that happened. Another one says they went to Britain, and then from Britain they came to Fife. Anyway, somehow these bones, whether they're the real bones or not, I don't know. It doesn't make any difference. What makes a difference is that it makes an impact on the psyche of the people. This is what missionaries do, isn't it? That missionaries, yes, we are interested in individual conversions, but what we're more interested in is starting movements. Starting a movement that will impact a nation. And that's what happened in Scotland. A movement happened, and a nation was impacted. And we fast forward another couple hundred years. Now there's a king, and this king of Scotland is at battle. He's at war. And in the middle of the battle, he has a dream. And he sees the white cross against a blue sky. And he believes that God is telling him, trust me, and I will win the battle. He does. The battle's won. Andrew becomes the patron saint of Scotland. And then we fast forward again, another several hundred years, and this flag is produced. Now, isn't this interesting? What does all this have to do with where we are today? Think, okay, $10, Dan, I can't get you to pull this all together, but I will. Okay, the point is this, and I didn't know this, but it's kind of cool to observe. This picture back here, I'm going to read from that, but it says, and how can they hear about him unless someone tells them? And how can they hear about him, unless someone, that's the second part. I guess that's a reflection, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And so we're going to read from Romans chapter 10 here in just a minute. But the point is this, that history is a great tool to be a launching pad for us. And I asked you about Reebok shoes, and I have a picture of a Reebok shoe, and I think, Mark, you said you had a pair of Reebok shoes. I don't know if they look like these. These are girls' shoes, so pink. They're probably not yours. But if you look at where it says Reebok, right next to it, what's there? I don't know if you can see it. It's right here. There's the Union Jack. Okay, and what that is, think of it this way. every time you put your Reeboks on, every time you get up in the morning, I want you to think about this. Lord, could today be the day that I would do this? And I'm going to read from Romans 10 real quick here, starting with verse 13. For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. And how are they to call on him in whom they have not believed? And how are they to believe in him of whom they have never heard? And how are they to hear without someone preaching? And how are they to preach unless they are sent? Unless they are sent. And as it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who preach good news. You have beautiful feet because you're preaching good news. And my prayer, my hope today in this little vignette, taking us down the corridors of history, would be that, history has an impact on my life. That when I put my shoes on today, Lord, would you help me to preach the good news to somebody? Would you enable me to recognize when I'm in the middle of a divine appointment and I have that opportunity to share with somebody about your great grace, just as Andrew did, to bring somebody to Jesus. And we don't know how that happens, but here's one other just real interesting story. If you think about it, this flag has 3 crosses on it. 3 crosses. What does that remind you of?
Jesus.
Golgotha, Calvary, right? I think, well, isn't that interesting? Every time you see a British flag, the Union Jack, think of Calvary and think of, Lord, are you challenging me this day to go, to be a goer, to go and to share the good news with somebody and to see what might happen, to bring somebody to Jesus, just like Andrew did. And every time Andrew brought somebody to Jesus, what did he get to do? He got to see Jesus even a little better, didn't he? And that was my prayer for you, that you'll get to see Jesus even a little bit better as you do all of this. So that's my story for today, and I hope we tied it together, and I'll turn it back over to David. So, okay.